Sheriff here with Pluralsight. This module is building a local storage publisher. The goals for this particular module are to create our log to local storage class to be able to log entries into the local storage of our web browser. We're also going to learn how to clear values from the console and the local storage by hooking up the clear methods that we wrote in our publishers up to the log service. We're also going to see how to log an object value such as a product or a customer class. And we're going to add a custom method to the local storage class to say retrieve all the values, and we'll display those then in an unordered list. Let's get started. Going back to our overall logging architecture, we're now going to build the local storage logging class that inherits from the log publisher class. That's the base class we created. That's the abstract base class. So we're going to create one that actually can store our log information now to local storage. We're going to use the built-in local storage object that Angular and JavaScript make available to us. We're going to first read from local storage anything that was written prior and create a log entry array, because what we're going to store into local storage will be a log entry array. So we need to read any existing items first. Then we append the new log entry to the array. And finally, we then store the complete array with the new value back into local storage. Let's take a look at building our log local storage class. Open the log publisher.ts file, and let's create another class called log local storage. This is going to extend the log publisher, just like we did before. Now we're going to add a constructor because we need to do a little bit of work to initialize this class. Anytime you have a derived class and you have a constructor, you need to call super to have it invoke the constructor of the base class. Next, we're going to set the location. Now, the location for local storage is going to be a key name, so I'm just going to call it logging as the key name here. Now, you'll notice we have a couple of squiggles here. It says that we have not basically implemented the clear or the log methods. So let's go ahead and grab these guys from up here, and we'll copy them, and we'll paste them down into here. Get rid of abstract on both of these, and then add the method body here. Let's go ahead and in the log, let's create our return value here, and let's default it to false. Then we can return an observable of that variable. Now we'll set that to true if everything gets recorded correctly. Otherwise, we will return a false if something doesn't get recorded correctly. For the clear, there's really nothing to do other than let's return an observable of true. Now we got rid of all that. We're now ready to start building the body of each of these methods. Let's start building the log. Now, one of the things we mentioned in the slides is that we're going to read in the array of log entries from local storage and see if any exist. So we're going to start out just creating a variable here called values. Let's go ahead and create a try catch here. And in the try portion is where we're going to start. Let's set values equal to json.parse. We're going to use local storage. This is the object that's built into Angular and JavaScript, of course. And we're going to call its getItem method. Now what it needs is the key. Well, as I mentioned, the key is this .location. Now here's the problem. If we don't find anything because it's the first time you've run this application, we need to return something other than a null. So I'll take the results of all of this, and if it's null, then we'll return an empty array. Now all we have to do is add a new log entry to the array. So values.push, and we grab the record here that comes in, and we push that onto our array. Next, store the complete array into local storage. Again, you don't have to write all the comments if you don't want to. I like doing it just because it reminds me what I'm doing. On local storage, to save something, we're going to call the set item. We give it the key name again, and then what we want to store. Well, in this case, we want to stringify our array of log entries. If something goes wrong, let's go ahead and just log the exception to the console window. Now let's add the code to clear the log. So we just simply do local storage dot remove item, again giving it the key name. That will remove all of the array items from that storage location. And with that, we've now created our complete log local storage publishing class. Open the log publisher service, and let's now add on our new log local storage class so that we can then create an instance of it here in the build publishers. So just like we did before, we're going to add a new item now to our publishers array in our services class. Right? This log publisher service, remember, he's the guy who's building this array that then gets fed to the log service. So now we have two different locations that we're going to log to because we've specified in this array that we have two places to log. So the log service loops through and will publish to each one of those here in the write to log method. Let's test our new service, but to do that, let's go over here into our new log entry and let's set a breakpoint, right? So we're going to set a breakpoint right on this line where it reads out the data from local storage. Let's come over here to our debug. Let's actually make sure we save everything. Come back over here to debug, and let's go ahead and launch our debugger, and we'll hit then that breakpoint. So here I've got the breakpoint. I'm going to read from the logging key in local storage. Let's go ahead and F10. Since this is the first time running, I don't get anything back, so just as we expected, I get an empty array. We're now going to take this log entry object that we created with all of the data, and we're going to store that by pushing it onto the values array and then storing that into the local storage using set item. And then we return a true. I'll go ahead and just press F5 and let this run. So we've got one item stored. Now let's go ahead and run it one more time. Again, we pause over here. Now this time we should see that we get one back because we already stored the object from before, right there. So that's the one that we stored a little bit earlier. And now we just add another one in, so now our values has two objects in it, and then we store it right back into local storage. I'll go ahead and press F5 and just let it run. And there we go. We've got now the ability to write to local storage. If you remember, we've written a clear method in each of our log publishers, but we need to have a clear method inside of our log service class as well. So open up the log service class and add a clear method somewhere. Now for this, we do just like we did before. We have a for here. We're going to loop through each of the loggers in the publisher's array, and each time through we'll just simply call its clear method. We then need a way to test this out. So let's open up our log test component.html, and let's create a new button that says clear log. That means we need to add a clear log method here to our log test component. Clear log, and this .logger.clear. All right, let's save everything. Let's go ahead and run this, but before we do, make sure that you still have a breakpoint set here where you're logging to storage. And then let's go ahead and run this through the debugger. I'm going to go ahead and hit the test log, and it should pause there. That's great. And let's check and make sure. So we do have one in there already, so this will put 2 into there. And it also has now something in the console log here. And let's hit that again just to make sure. Okay, so now let's go ahead and clear the log. So notice that the console is now cleared. So hopefully now the other side, the local storage, has been cleared as well. So what we want to do, hopefully we're going to be able to, see this hit on this breakpoint here. So we come over here, and we should have nothing in our array. So we cleared the console, and we cleared local storage. One thing I mentioned at the beginning of the course is that we should be able to log a string, a number, or even an object. Let's do that now. In the log test folder, add a new file called product.ts. Create a class called product that has just some properties: product ID, product name, introduction date, price, and URL. Then let's create an instance of this class and then call it. So to call it, we're obviously going to need another button to test this thing. And again, feel free to use any sort of unit testing you want. If you want to do it that way, that's perfectly fine as well. So let's log an object. Go ahead and create an object log method here. Now, what we have to do, of course, is create an instance of product. To do that, we are going to have to import product. So I previously did this, so go ahead and add that as well. And then you can create a new instance of it. After that, we just assign some values. So product ID is equal to 1, product.productName, a new product. Product.introduction date is equal to a new date, how about? And let's set up a price. And let's set up a URL. Now that we have that, we should be able to do this .logger.log, and we can pass in this is a product object. And then go ahead and just pass as one of our values the product instance. Save all of that, save all of our open files actually, and then we'll go ahead and run this and make sure everything works. Let's go ahead and flip over to our browser and try out this new login object. So here you can see the type is all, the message is this is a product object, and now here is the extra info, all stringified, just as you'd expect. Just wanted to make sure that we did try that out and tested it. That should also now be stored in local storage as well. Let's learn how to add a custom method to our local storage that allows us to get all the values. So we're going to add a custom method called getAll. we're going to use the local storage getItem method to retrieve the array of values that we stored in local storage. We'll add an unordered list to our HTML page to then display that local storage array. Let's take a look at getting all values from local storage. Open the logpublishers.ts, locate the log local storage class, and let's add our new method called getAll, and it's going to return an observable log entry array. So let's create our log entry array return value here. Return an observable of values. Let's retrieve all values from local storage. So values equals json.parse. So just like we did before, we're going to do the local storage dot get item from this dot location. And if it doesn't find any, let's return an empty array. Of course, if we've done a couple of logs, we're going to have it there. Component.ts, and what we're going to look for is the log service and log level here. We're going to bring in the log entry as well, and then let's also import the log local storage from shared log-publishers. What we're going to do then is down here, we're going to add a new property to our log test component. Because remember, we're going to add an unordered list. We need a property to feed that list. So we're going to create a new property here called log entries. That's of the type log entry array. Go down and add a new method, get local storage. And inside of here, what we need to do is find a specific instance in our publisher's array of this log local storage. Remember, we didn't add the getAll to our abstract base class, so we need to find just this one instance of this publisher, because we don't really need a getAll for the console. That doesn't make sense. So what we can do is we can do this .logger.publishers.find. We can loop through, or have it loop through our publishers and say, let's find where the p constructor dot name is equal to log local storage. So when it finds it, let's go ahead and assign that to a little temp variable here. So you can see what we've done, right? We've got the find here, and it's simply saying, let's figure out where that name is. Test and make sure we got one. So if it's not equal to null, then hey, we know that we've got a valid publisher. Cool. So let's cast that as a log local storage. And now we can get all of the values by doing local.getAll. There's our method. .subscribe. We get a response. And we take that response and we assign it to our local array. Open up the HTML now. Let's add on a BR tag and then create another button. We're going to hook up to the click event the method we just wrote, get local storage. Get from local storage. Let's go ahead and add another BR tag down here. And now we can add our unordered list. And inside of here, we're going to simply loop through all of the publishers in that log entries array that we created. And then each time through, we're going to grab that log and report out its message property. Remember, each one of these is a log entry object in our log entries array. Let's test everything out now. Save our changes. Go over to our browser. We should have the new button. Let's go ahead and click on the button. And there we go. So now you may have more or less entries, just depends on what you have, but you could add a few more. Just keep clicking on the test log, log another object maybe, and everything that you've done should now show up on your screen. In this module, we saw how we can log an array of values to local storage. We also saw how we could clear values from both the council and local storage classes. We learned how to log a product object, or really any type of object, and we figured out how to get all values just from local storage. Coming up in the next module, we're going to create the Web API publisher so that we can log values through the Web API. I hope you'll join me for the next module. Hello everybody, Paul Sheriff here with Pluralsight. This module is building a Web API publisher. The goals for this particular module are to build a Web API for logging. We're going to create an Angular Web API publisher by inheriting from that log publisher base class we created before. We're then going to create C# classes and the appropriate Web API server-side code, and then we'll call the Web API from Angular. Let's go ahead and get started. Going back to our overall logging architecture, we're going to be building our Web API logging class, as you see down here in the right-hand corner. It's going to inherit from that log publisher base class, just like the council logging did and the local storage logging class did. When we log to the Web API, we need to add this log Web API publisher, add the HTTP Angular service. We're going to have Angular inject the HTTP Angular service into our log Web API publisher, and we're going to make a call to the Web API then from within that Angular class. On the server side, we're going to create a log entry class in C# that exactly matches the same properties that we created in TypeScript. Also create a log level enumeration in C# that exactly matches the same enumerations we did in TypeScript as well. And of course, we're going to create a Web API log controller class. Let's create our C# classes first for the Web API, then we'll look at writing the Angular code. I'm going to use Microsoft Visual Studio to create my new Web API project. I'm going to give it the name Log Web API, and we're going to choose the Web API template project. When we click OK, it's going to take a bit to kind of get everything downloaded from the packages here and create the project. Once it's done, let's go ahead and go into the models and let's add a class. And I'm just going to create it log level. Now we're not actually going to create a class, it's actually going to be a public enum because we want to match the enumeration that we have over there in TypeScript. So we're going to do all is equal to 0, we're going to do debug is equal to 1, we're going to have info equal to 2, we're going to have warn equal to 3, error equal to 4, fatal equal to 5, and finally off will be 6. So that matches exactly what we had in the TypeScript. Let's now add another class. This one is going to be our log entry class. Now this is our public class that matches the class that we have over there in TypeScript. So let's add a date time here, which is called entry date. And we'll have our string called message. We'll have our log level called level. And our last one is actually going to be an object array, and that's going to be our extra info. That was an any array down on TypeScript. So we've got our two classes created here that now match what we have in TypeScript. Now let's start adding on our Web API controller for the logging. Right mouse click on the controllers folder and add a Web API controller class and give it the name log controller. If you want, you can delete the values controller, and you can even delete the home controller if you want. Now all we're going to do in here is we're going to wipe out everything that's there so far, because we're just going to add back our own. First thing we're going to do is make this an HTTP post, because we're going to be posting our log data to this controller method. We're then going to create a public method called post that's going to return an iHTTP action result. Then let's do a from body log entry value. Log entry is the class, so we got to fix that one up, right? So we'll have to use our little light bulb here and make sure we're bringing in the namespace models. Now let's create the body of this. Let's get our return result. Now what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to put a little to-do. Write some code to store logging data to a table. So I'm not going to do this part. I'm just going to leave this as a to-do for you, because I'm assuming you'll have some sort of table on the back end. And then if everything comes back okay, we're going to go ahead and just return an okay. And let's go ahead and put a true in there so we know that everything went fine. So there's our log controller. Now obviously you'd write a little bit of code here using the entity framework or whatever you want to do to post the data down. I'm going to set a breakpoint here because I do want to make sure that we are getting into here, but I'm not going to write that additional code right now. One of the reasons I used a Visual Studio project here is because we're over in Visual Studio Code, and we have to be aware of cross-origin resource sharing. So this happens when we are calling a different domain from the one that we're in. Remember, when we're running Visual Studio Code, we're running like the light server, or maybe you're running, Node or whatever. And what happens with that is now if we're calling something over here in Visual Studio, that's running maybe under IIS Express. That's a different domain. So we need to implement CORS, this cross-origin resource sharing. So what we have to do is we have to install this in our Visual Studio Web API application. Let's take a look at how we add CORS to the Web API project we just created. Right mouse click on your project and choose Manage NuGet Packages. Go to the Browse tab, type in CORS. You should find the Microsoft.ASP.NET.WebAPI.CORS package that we can now install. Click on the Install button and it will download and put the necessary pieces into your Web API project. Go ahead and accept. And that's it. We now have the ability to use CORS in our application. Let's go to the App Start folder and look in the Web API config class here. And one of the things that we want to do is enable CORS. So what we do is we type in config.enable CORS. So we're using the configuration that is passed to us, and we enable CORS. That's the first step. Go back into your log controller. add a using statement for system.web.http.cores, like so. And then what we're going to do is we're going to enable a CORS attribute. We're going to add an attribute here to our log controller. Enable CORS, you'll see it appear. What we want to specify here is origins. And I'm just going to use everything. Now, if you want to be more specific, you could actually, specify HTTP : and then put a very specific piece in there if you want. I'm just going to choose everything for now. Headers, same thing. Whichever, kind of headers you want to put in here is fine. Again, I'm just going to allow everything. And as far as methods, yeah, same thing. Let's just go ahead and keep it simple for now. This will be up to you to kind of, fine-tune this based on your particular needs. All right, so once we have that attribute in there, CORS is now enabled, which means that we should be able to call from our Angular app into our Visual Studio application. We're now ready to start writing the Angular code, so let's build a log web API class and add our log method. We're also going to add a handle errors method because we want to be able to handle any errors that occur when you make a call to the web API. And of course we need our clear method as well to satisfy the requirements of overriding those abstract methods in the log publisher base class. We're then going to take this log web API class and add it to our log publishers service. That's the one that builds that array of which publishers the log service should publish to. Let's create our log web API class and we'll test publishing to the web API. Back in Visual Studio Code, open up log-publishers.ts. Now we're going to have to import some more classes to use. We're going to use HTTP, response, headers, and Angular/HTTP. Now, if you've made any web API calls and done a post, you are very familiar with these various classes. We're also going to have to add a couple more imports from the reactive library as well. So we want to add the operator map. We want to add the operator catch and an observable throw. Now that we have those, we can start adding on and building our log web API class. Let's go down to the bottom of this particular file and let's export the class log web API that extends log publisher. So we're building this just like we built the log local storage as well. Let's go up and let's grab our two method definitions here and remove abstract from each of those. Add the method body. And we at least have the start of the structure of our class here. If you remember, I want to add on one more method called handle errors. And this is going to return an observable of any, like so. So we even have more of our structure now. And one last thing we're going to need is our constructor. And to the constructor, we're going to pass in the HTTP service. We'll see how this gets passed in just a little bit later. And of course, we have to add the call to super because this is extending an existing class. In the log local storage, we had a location that we had set to a key name. Well, here we're doing the web API, so we're going to need a call to localhost. That's going to be our key for this one, or the location. Now, we don't know what the number is yet because we haven't taken a look at the Visual Studio project. We haven't run it and found out what the port is. But at least do know that we're going to call into localhost some number /API/log. Let's go ahead and start writing our log now. I'm going to create a variable that is of the type headers. And to this, we actually pass in an object, and the object has one property here, content type. And the value we set is application/JSON. We're going to take our record, which is our log entry class, and we're going to convert that to JSON. We're also going to create an options variable that's of the type request options. And again, what we need to pass in is a property and a values. The value is actually our variable that we created there. Now we just need to return this.http.post, and we're going to pass in this.location. That'll pass, tell it where to go, that HTTP call. We're then going to pass in our record. Now the record is the log entry record. And finally the options. Now we're going to map the response that comes back. We want it to be converted to JSON. And we also want to catch any errors and have it call our handle errors method that we created just a minute ago. Next, let's go down and finish off our clear. Now, we don't have anything to do. I'm going to put a to-do here. Call web API to clear all log entries. So we're not going to do that. I didn't create anything in the Visual Studio application, but I'm sure you can do this. So I'm going to leave that as an exercise for you. And of course, we're going to return it true right now, but later on you would change that to map it to some real value. Let's now write our handle errors. In the handle errors, we're going to create a string array, and we'll assign it to an empty array first. We're going to create a message, like so. And then we're going to start building up a message here. So this is just going to basically give us a little feedback. So I'm going to say the status, and we're going to grab error.status. So that's coming from our error object that gets passed in. I'm going to grab the status text. This is just pretty generic error type things we would do. I apologize, that should have been a lowercase s there. And then we're going to check to see if error.json is not null. And if it's not, we're going to go ahead and add on the exception message that we're getting back from the web API call. Now that we have the message built, let's push that message onto this errors array. Let's also go ahead and log that out to the console as an error. We'll specify an error message, and then we'll put the payload there as the errors array. And finally, we're going to return observable.throw. And what we're going to throw is that errors array. So that's how we can communicate back to Angular that something went wrong here on our application.
Yeah, working only. But I didn't go online, but app was working.
The last thing we need to do to finish off our log web API class is get the port number from our Visual Studio project. So we're going to go back into the properties here of our Visual Studio project, choose web, and we're going to grab this number right here. So go ahead and copy this, and then we can go back to code, We can locate where we had put in 9999 before, and we can paste that number in. This class is now ready. We need to just add it to our log publishing service. Open up your log publisher service now, and what we need to do is add in our new class, log web API, and we're also going to need to import the HTTP service, and that comes from Angular/HTTP, like so. Now, that means that in the constructor for this, we also need to do private HTTP and bring in the HTTP here. That's all we have to do. We just need it available because when we create an instance of our new publisher here, we need to pass it in. Because remember, that's what we put over here in our constructor, that we need to pass in that HTTP service. So we have to have a service that gets it from Angular so that we can pass it on. Let's go ahead and do that now. So we're going to create an instance now of the log web API class. So we'll change this to log web API, and we're going to pass in this .http because that is now available to us in this class. Let's now go over to app.module.ts, and let's import the HTTP module from Angular HTTP. Because we need to import that whole module because we're going to be using many of the services from HTTP.
देखो ये देश में अपने है ना कि बोलते हैं हिंदू मुसलमान माँ चुराने या फूकते हैं एक बिहारी है तो बच्चे सोचते हैं इसी के यहाँ ले लो साला 20 रुपए सब आराम देता है वही साला
If we've done everything correctly, we should be able to go back over to Visual Studio and run this application. So we want to get it started. Make sure that you still have that breakpoint there. If you remember, I kind of set a breakpoint in that log controller. So make sure you have a breakpoint here. Then let's go back to Visual Studio Code. So actually there's nothing we need to do here. Let's go to our browser here where we have our test log. Now if we've done everything correctly, when we click on this, it's going to log to the console, it's going to log to local storage, and then it's going to make the call to the web API. Now let's go back. Sorry, let's go back one more time here. Make sure we save everything. There we go. Now we can go back to here, click on test log, and look at that, we're in. So that means that we've logged to the console, logged to local storage, and we made our call. You would write code now here to actually store that same data into a table in SQL Server or Oracle or wherever you want to store it. And we've now then published to 3 different locations.
Right now only, but I didn't receive any messages like this.
recording कौन चल रही है भाई
You receive this message, ah?
उसका recording तू कर रहा है recording वो करना
maybe top performers may get this offer, I think.
IDM करो सारा डाउनलोड कर लो
top performers are senior employees may get this offer.
In this module, we created a C# class and an enumeration to match the ones that we created in TypeScript. We then built a web API controller that we can call from Angular, and we added the Angular classes necessary to call that web API, and we modified our log publisher service to add that class to the collection so that as we say we want to log, it logs now to the console, to local storage, and finally calls our web API service. Coming up in the next module, we're going to learn how to configure these publishers now via a JSON file. I hope you'll join me for the next module.
समझे भैया डेटाबेस कब तक पढ़ते रहेंगे पढ़ लीजिए थोड़ा और पाइथन में पढ़िए आपका और बेनिफिट होगा
क्या पढ़ रहा है
वही बात है पाइथन पढ़ेंगे तो दीपक देख के एग्जाम अभी आ जाएंगे अभी मल्टी स्टार हो जाएंगे 15 से 16 लाख पे उठाएंगे आप
एक बार पहले एंट्री करने की फिर सारा एक बार एंट्री